Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Recruiter Table Talk. My name is JT O'Donnell. I'm the founder and CEO of Work It Daily and the host of today's podcast. So excited to have you here. Our topic this month is recruiting in an unfamiliar industry, and we're going to talk about the tips for success. And honestly, there's no better team to be giving you these tips for success other than wonderful women of the Duffy Group. So let's get them right up here on stage. Hello, all. How's it going today?
Great.
Good.
Great. Doing well.
I mean, I'm not even going to venture a guess. If I was to calculate how many hours and years, months, years, days of recruiting expertise are on this call, it's up there, right? I'm feeling pretty good. It's up there. And so talk about recruiting in an unfamiliar industry. I know that you all are extremely familiar with this, given your background. So Sharon, I'm going to pick on you first. Let's talk about things that people should be thinking about when they dive into this.
Yes, learning a new industry. Over the years, I've had people ask me, Sharon, why don't you work for a company instead of working for recruiting firms? And my answer has always been pretty consistent. Well, that's kind of boring for me because then I would be just talking about the same company and industry every day, all day. And I like to learn new things. I'm very curious. And I like the diversity. I like that constant change. And when I started my recruiting career, I was working in nonprofit. So there were a lot of industries that I didn't have a lot of the depth and the knowledge about. But I didn't think about that. You don't know what you don't know. And I just dove right in. And I was learning, and I really wasn't realizing how much I was learning and how fun and easy that it was. So I just say, don't have a fear. Have that open mind, be positive and curious. If you're current on business and economic news, then you probably know more about an industry than you think. But learning from talking to your hiring leader. And here's a tip, and this was helpful for me because when I started, I was specialized in the accounting and finance. So if your hiring leader is an accounting or finance person, you'll learn the ins and outs of the company and that industry. And when I started, I had a lot of clients in the manufacturing sector. So when I would go out and do tours, and especially if I'm working in accounting and learning about the cost accounting and all the things that go into making the product, and then you're seeing it happen. So you might also be learning about multiple industries because of how that product is made and where they're sourcing and all that. And to me, that was always very fascinating. So I say just stay curious, learn the buzzwords, ask the hiring leader what drew them to that industry and what keeps them.
Love it. Fantastic. I love the fact that you love the variety, and your point about curiosity is well taken, that if you want to be successful in this, be curious, right? You have to take an interest in the industry that you're learning. Speaking of that, Kristen, you made a comment prior to this about the ability that you can become an expert. You can appear to be an expert if you do a little homework, if you do a little due diligence. Talk about that a bit.
Sure. Absolutely. The internet is your friend. You really can become an expert in an unfamiliar industry really by just doing a lot of research up front. And I think the best way to do that is really looking at either online or print publications. If you could subscribe to them, take a look at who the top players are in the industry, people, companies. What's the trending technology? What are some of the drawbacks of being in this industry? Kind of what are their roadblocks? There's videos on everything now. Are there any TED Talks about this industry? Are there any podcasts about this industry? Who are the top players? So I think it's really important to understand, even if you're dealing with a mid-level or smaller company, who are the biggest players and what are they best at? Are there recent articles about them, maybe on LinkedIn or in some business journals? That's some of my favorite time during the week is reading the business journals here locally in Phoenix and finding out about what industries are doing, but really digging deeper on a specific industry that you don't know a lot about can help you, really become an expert. And then I think also if there's any events or conferences, some of that research may show you that there's a conference coming up locally or at least in a nearby state. It's relatively easy to travel there. Or maybe if it's local, your company could be an event sponsor. So just be to have a presence at that event would be amazing. Um, Joining industry specific groups, either in person or online. LinkedIn makes this super easy. You can search for groups on LinkedIn. So really just expanding your network, picking up the phone and even calling some of those members, just saying, do you have 10 minutes just to fill me in? People love to talk about themselves. So, fill me in a little bit about what your company does and why you're so successful. And then, there's always resources on the web like Dun and Bradstreet, Better Business Bureau, and Zoom Info is also a great website to give you more data on maybe company size, revenue, things like that.
Okay, that first of all, what came to mind was no excuses, because if there's that much information at your fingertips on the internet, then you really know that you can figure this out. You can make it familiar. Plus, just all the various sources you cited, I think it just shows your depth of knowledge, not just you, Kristen, but Duffy Group. There's clearly a process that you all put in place to familiarize yourself to great lengths, which is exciting. I know another thing, we just talked all about sort of online and virtual. Georgia, you're a big believer in the on-site visit. Talk to me about that and the value that provides.
Right. So first of all, I just want to say that the tips that have been provided so far by Kristen and Sharon have been excellent. And I think once you've gotten through that, right, your research, it's important to, if you aren't familiar, remember to couple it with a site visit. Site visits are personally one of my favorite things because it's a valuable opportunity for you to see, the culture of the organization, meet the leadership, see the people that operate in this environment, possibly a new environment to you. So these are excellent ways for you to get really close, up close with the people that are actually producing the work and what have you. Now, more recently, you talk about diversity. We're working in a lot of diverse industries, and they change. So speaking, to what Sharon was saying, the diversity of our work, even though we may be think we're familiar with this specific industry, things do change. And so going in every now and then and doing the site check and seeing what trends are moving through that particular industry is really, really important. We recently did a site visit of a nonprofit where they were working specifically with foster families. Now, what was unique about this particular client was that they had a 50,000 square foot warehouse where this candidate was going to have to be working and working very closely with the people that they would be supporting. So it's very important, we thought, for a recruiter to actually go in, talk to the employers, the staff, understand the landscape, where they'll be reporting, the products they'll be touching, and their client base. And that was very important to the pitch. In other words, how we were going to present this to candidates. Because while we don't represent candidates, we want to make sure we're doing our due diligence and pairing the right candidate for the right role. In addition to that, there was a recent site visit that I was a part of that I absolutely adored. It was with a manufacturer who produced, it was a laser company. Now, we don't do this every day. In addition, the employer, the owner of the company is a new owner. They were buying the previous owners out. And so as you can imagine, this was going to be a 7-year contract between him taking over. And so the prior owners who are still owners are on site working alongside of him. You can just imagine the uniqueness of that dynamic. So going in, meeting the previous owners, meeting the new owner, understanding how they work together was critical to the success of the search. I think if that had been done offsite or virtually, we wouldn't have gotten the essence. So I think in addition to all the research you need to do, there's nothing better than coupling that with an on-site visit. It's a great way to build rapport. It's a great way to keep connected. And that's the type of partnership that I like to be a part of.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that you talked about it, especially if you're a visual learner. There is a ton that you pick up, and the context that you talked about. So much stuff gets put into context when you're physically there checking it out. I think that's So insightful. So we hear all this so far from Sharon, Kristen, and Georgia, Colleen, and the thought becomes, well, this could be pretty daunting because, like I said, no excuses. There's a lot you can do. So how much of it do you do? When is enough? Like, what suggestions can you give to everybody so they don't feel so overwhelmed when they're trying to do this?
Sure, JT. Well, thank you. Yes, I think there's been great suggestions shared so far. And I do love the site visits as well. I feel like there's just additional energy, enthusiasm, and details that are able to be shared after doing a site visit like that. So thank you for that, Georgia. But, when it comes to recruiting in a new industry, I certainly have been there. I mean, I started my career with a search firm where I had no experience in the industry, and really dove in and followed the tips that many of my colleagues have shared already. And, we all have to start somewhere. And the tip that I have to share with you all is to really leverage the candidates. They are just such a wealth of information. And as Kristen mentioned earlier, people like to be thought as, thought leaders in their industry. Think about times when people have approached you and asked if they can, pick your brain. It's flattering, and of course you have to, pick and choose the appropriate time to be able to get that type of time commitment from a candidate. But I do believe that is where you can get so much information. You're talking to some of the top players in the industry, and so you've got their attention. Asking them questions like, where would you look if you were me? Ask them, where do people like this hang out? And, we're referencing professional associations and, things like that. And, what do you do to keep up on trends within your industry? And really find out, where are the conferences? Who are the top players? Who are the top people? What are the biggest issues? And the candidates are going to have that information. And you will just learn so much from your candidates. Another tip that I have to share is to define what we call a benchmark candidate. So that means somebody who really has the ideal background that we're looking for. Once you have identified a benchmark candidate, it is going to make it a lot easier for you to understand, what is a good candidate in that field. And it can be really fun to Sharon's point, to really have that variety working in different industries. Unlike Sharon, I love being an expert in certain fields, and spent my first, about 20 years in healthcare only. But guess what? I made a switch and needed to step out of healthcare for a while, and needed to learn a whole new industry. And that was so much fun to be able to learn that new industry and then not be so pigeonholed into just one. So there are ways that you can really be able to, be an expert while also lending your expertise to multiple industries.
I love it. That's so fantastic. I love the benchmark candidate too, right? Just helping put some, again, framework around what you're trying to do. So Kathleen, as the team captain of the Duffy Group, the CEO of the Duffy Group, you were talking about how much the show Ted Lasso kind of ties to this topic today. I really want to hear that. As a huge Ted Lasso fan, let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, you cannot have a conversation without pulling in Ted Lasso, right? And so, Sharon, you hit the nail on the head with the word curiosity, right? And so we all know that the Ted Lasso show is about this American college football coach, and he was hired to coach a professional soccer team in England, and he had no idea what soccer really was, or had no experience being a soccer coach. And so of course it was all, the storyline is all about his curiosity and vulnerability that led him to be successful in his role. And so that's kind of, as I was thinking about this topic, that's kind of where I wanted to kick that off. And we could see how, as recruiters, we all have a natural curiosity to try to figure things out. And how do we leverage that curiosity to get into new industries, new technologies, new functions. And my background is just like Colleen's. I came into the executive search world straight out of college, had worked for a very short time in corporate America. So realistically, I wasn't even too sure how organizations were structured. And so I needed to make sure as I started working with this search firm, how was I going to maintain my credibility, even though I didn't know anything, right? So Kristen talked about the use of technology. And I think that, again, when I got started in the industry, the internet had not even been thought of yet. And so we were still at the library and doing a lot of phone calls to ask those questions. And so we still are doing those same strategies. But I wanted to tell you a little story. So recently I was talking with a new client, and we were talking about, I think, an HR role, and in the course of our conversation, the head of the talent acquisition said, we're looking at bringing a new function into our organization, and we need to hire a mechatronics engineer. And I'm like, a mecha what engineer? I had no idea what he was talking about. And so he didn't really know what it was. So he was going to put us to task to put a strategy together to be able to find these kinds of people. So we knew that we needed to at least have some ground rules or ground information. And so, we used the internet to find out, where would a mechatronics engineer be working today? And some of the answers were they're in the automotive industry, they're in the aerospace industry, they're in consumer electronics, they're in robotics. They might be in a research and development function in academia or in industry. So that's still really, really broad, but it gives you enough information to probe deeper with that hiring leader, right? Now, we don't have a lot of those industries here in Phoenix, or if we do, it's very small. And so where would mechatronics engineers live? Where's the hub? So I learned that it was Detroit, Michigan, Silicon Valley, and Houston. Well, Silicon Valley is a difficult geography to relocate to the Phoenix marketplace, but Detroit and Houston are great. So now we could start focusing on there. There were some countries like Japan and Germany. I don't think they were really interested in international relocation. But then, you start going into the automotive space or an aerospace, and you're trying to figure out, well, how am I going to find this person? What are some of the words that they use? What are their titles? Because, job titles used to pretty much be similar from industry to industry, company to company, and that's changed a lot too. So what might their titles be? And, it could be a control systems engineer, it could be a robotics engineer. So, basically we're getting ourselves to be closer to being this expert in the space by being able to ask the hiring leader more specific questions around where we're going to be able to find this, what are the key words that we're going to be able to use to determine if we can identify the right person, and then ask them what we call the hurdle questions to make sure that we actually are talking to somebody who is qualified to be a mechatronics engineer and not a something else tronics engineer. So I think, again, it's about being curious and doing the research that you have at your fingertips, and then just start talking like everyone else has said. Just start asking the questions.
JT, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
There's always one that has to do this. It's not a real podcast unless somebody doesn't have their mic on. So I'm glad it's me. My point that I was making was that you all make it sound, I don't want to say easy, but doable. But I know for a fact that the only reason that you can all make this sound so doable is because of the depth of experience that you have in it. And I think it's one of the reasons why some people out there, you can do this yourself, but you also really should consider the one thing that none of you have said, because you're too kind, tapping into a resource or a company like the Duffy Group to help do it for you, right? I mean, there are some high payoff activities that are better left to the pros who can expedite this entire process a lot farther. So with that in mind, folks, we're going to take some questions now from the Duffy Group. But before we do that, do you see all their names here? Please go jot their names down, find and follow them on LinkedIn. And even if you want to, ask them to connect and make sure you told them that you saw them on Recruiter Table Talk, okay? Because they really do know what they're talking about and so worthwhile. And I'm so grateful that you're sharing this depth of information today. So we have a question that I actually am excited about. Michael Willis, you're a rock star. This question is fantastic. The question is, how can a recruiter be disruptive in an unfamiliar industry? I'm really digging that because I'm thinking, hey, there's something to be said for the fresh eyes, you know, maybe not being the recruiter that knows the industry inside and out, that somebody could come in and maybe do something different to get the attention. I think in some ways, you know, what you talked about in terms of Kathleen, you know, just working it backwards and getting in there and asking the questions. But are there other things you can do to be disruptive in order to get familiar? Thoughts? Anyone? Raise your hand if you want to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I was thinking about is you leverage your local university to, you know, talk to professors that are teaching these subjects. And, you know, that's where you can ask some of the I don't know, for lack of a better word, the dumb questions. I don't understand this. I'm getting into this. You know, can you talk to me like I'm a 2-year-old, and really be able to hear it from the professors? They are doing research projects with industry leaders, and that's also a really great way for them to start making introductions to you into some of those key players.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, so much talent sitting at the university level. Is there any power in social media? Have any of you, is there advantages to like putting in keyword searches for content, for example, on LinkedIn? You know, what are some of the ways that you talked about finding those candidates? You know, you narrowed it down by location. What happens in that outreach, for example? How do you get them to connect with you when you aren't necessarily a pro in the industry? Any thoughts on that? Who wants to take it? Thank you, Kristen.
I'll speak to that. Yeah, really, it's the way, I mean, at least the way that we operate, we learn so much about our client up front in our intake process that we're able to basically put together a sales pitch to passive candidates who are very happy in their current jobs, and let them know that there's this other amazing opportunity. It could change their life forever. And being able to do that through our recruitment research is a really valuable tool.
I love that. Speaking of tools, we've got a follow-up question. Recruiting tools. What kind of recruiting tools, technology do you find yourself using when it comes to familiarizing yourself with an industry? Kristen, you mentioned a couple of services, but is there any software tools that you all use? Yeah. Colleen, you're nodding. Take it away, my friend.
Yes, yeah. Well, we actually utilize a lot of tools, and our recruiters, you know, I think that's one of the great things that can really separate, you know, our abilities versus perhaps some of those that are in-house, is because we do have access to so many of those tools. And so, you know, it can be things like, you know, I'm just going to start with the basic, like LinkedIn Recruiter, where you're really able to get to many more people and see much more than with like a basic LinkedIn account. But then, you know, we utilize, you know, all sorts of different types of online resources. Some are paid, you know, some may not be paid, but you know, that's how, you know, for example, to be able to even find the phone numbers, we might find people but have no way to reach them. And so you've got to have those types of resources, as well as, you know, I always say, you know, Google's your friend. So, you know, that's nothing new to anybody here, but you wouldn't believe how many times we're on new searches where we're just putting into Google exactly what we're looking for, and then going from there with some of those resources. But JT, if you don't mind, I also wanted to touch on Michael's question as I reflected on, you know, being disruptive in a new industry.
Take it away.
I was thinking about, as I shared with you all, how I had that expertise in one industry, healthcare, and since then it's really has shifted and into the nonprofit space. And I think that Duffy Group has really proven to become quite a disruptive recruiter option, recruiting agency in that space. And one of the ways is by providing just significant ROI. These nonprofits, their money needs to be going towards serving their mission, not towards vendors like recruiters. And so I think we've been quite disruptive in that industry because we're not only able to tap into the talent that they need, doing what we know how to do, but by providing that those savings to those organizations, I think has been quite disruptive and something I'm really, really proud of our team for doing.
Oh, I love that. I love that. All right. I have a question for you, sort of the elephant in the room. So company knows that they've got a complex thing to fill. They could easily go to a recruiting company that's very familiar with it. But I would argue there might be some advantages to going to an organization that's as skilled as you all are, but maybe you don't have the depth of knowledge. What's the upside to engaging a recruiting company that has great process, but maybe doesn't have that expertise per se in that industry? There's got to be some thoughts on that.
Well, there's one that definitely stands out. Kathleen and I talk about this all the time, and that is, there's a blockage issue. So all recruiting firms should have a rule where they don't recruit out of client companies. And so you've got to have that hands-off rule, because if everybody was a client, then where are you going to get your candidates from? So there have certainly been those instances where we may not have deep expertise in an industry. However, we are not being blocked from going into any of those companies, and that is incredibly advantageous to the client.
Super powerful. I also think that over time, people get a little jaded. They think they know everything, right? And, I've been recruiting in this industry for 30 years and it's just not done that way. Meanwhile, the next generation of workers want something totally different. I recall, Kathleen, on a previous session, you really were giving some great examples around what the client wanted in terms of their location and their needs. And I think that gets, can oftentimes be failed to be looked at if the company's just so bent on hiring, based on that depth of knowledge and not really looking at the bigger picture. So it's kind of fascinating to me that can happen, but that's
Well,
one
and
thing.
I think I was going to say, Sharon, are you going to talk about the intelligence?
Well, no, what's coming to mind is our focus is on finding passive candidates. So the other firms, the traditional styles, they have their candidate base with their knowledge, they're active. So when they can think of something at the top of their head, there's someone that's actively looking. They're not going very far to hunt.
I love that point. You're absolutely right. The passive candidate, the person that's working and doesn't know there's a better job out there, right? That's so genius. So 30 minutes always flies by a little too fast with you ladies. Kathleen, I'm going to throw it back, Kathleen, I'm going to throw it back to you. Final thoughts for everybody listening today about recruiting into unfamiliar industries.
Yeah, so I think the other piece that, I'd like to, put a plug in is really around the market intelligence, the market data that a recruitment research firm does. So again, if a client is going into an unfamiliar area, one of the things, because we are experts in doing research and gathering that information, we actually can help educate that. So again, don't be afraid to step into new industries. Really embrace that curiosity gene. Learn how to ask questions. You've got so many resources at your fingertips, whether it's technology, whether it's the academia and candidates, hiring leaders. And it's okay to say, I've not done this before, and can you give me some words? I think that's the biggest thing. It's okay to ask.
I love that. I think it takes a really smart person to know that it's okay to ask, and you're going to get a better product when you do. Brilliant. As always, amazing work by the Duffy Group. Thank you for participating in another Recruiter Table Talk. Cannot wait to have you all back next month. Folks, tell us what your favorite part about was today. Put your aha moment in the comments. Also, jot their names down right now before I close this screen out and go over and find each and every one of these women on LinkedIn. Follow them. They're all sharing really important knowledge about recruiting, the recruiting industry, recruiting numbers, recruiting data, just the best. I've known them now for 2 years and they're the best at what they do. So follow them, connect with them, and then come back next month for another Recruiter Table Talk. Because if you want to win, you got to work it daily, right? All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Happy 4th of July. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, bye.